Hey YouTube, so I want to talk a little bit about pessimism. I would consider myself basically a pessimist. I've spoken about this before a few times. But what I want to do today is articulate a kind of joyful pessimism, which might sound a little bit paradoxical. But the first thing to say is that when I'm talking about pessimism here, I mean a philosophical position. It's philosophical pessimism. Sometimes we can use the term pessimism to refer to certain like personalities or temperaments, but that's not what I'm talking about. Pessimism as a philosophical position will involve the claim that life is mostly bad, that the bad prevails over the good in some sort of sense. And I've done much longer videos where I've explored the senses in which the bad prevails over the good, and I will link those in the comments. But this is a matter of sort of stepping back and reflecting on the quality of life. It's not a matter of personality. Somebody could have a relatively sunny sort of personality. They could be fairly kind of happy and cheerful, but maybe when they step back and reflect on the quality of life, they might well judge it to be mostly bad. Similarly, there could be somebody who is deeply depressed and they don't make any attempts to hide it, and they just come across as constantly miserable. But maybe they see themselves as an unlucky aberration, and they think that actually life is mostly good. So there's no necessary connection between one's endorsing pessimism as a philosophical position and one's personality. So with that said, I sort of want to express the sort of sunnier side of pessimism, the more joyful side of pessimism. I mean, that's just a sort of general point. But I think there are some more specific considerations that might kind of make philosophical pessimism, that might sort of show that it has certain benefits in perhaps unexpected ways. First of all, I think that pessimism interacts in an interesting way with regret. Many of us will look back on our lives and wish we had done things differently. And that can be a source of quite a lot of distress. We just think like, if only I had made this different decision, then I would be better off. But if we look at this from a pessimist point of view, the pessimist is going to say, well, look, life is just bad, and life generally doesn't get better. Even when you manage to achieve the things that you want, even when you achieve your goals, that doesn't usually make life better. That doesn't usually make things better. So what tends to happen is, you pursue some sort of goal, you achieve it, but then you just end up wanting more things. You form a new goal. So maybe you have the desire to buy the big new house, but then when you get the big new house, it doesn't provide any lasting satisfaction. You just end up wanting something else. So there might be somebody who kind of regrets a decision that they made, which means that they are poorer, for instance. If only they had made this different decision, they would have more money, they'd have enough money to buy the big new house. But the pessimist is going to say, well, hang on, this big new house, even if you had managed to achieve it, probably wouldn't have brought you the sort of satisfaction that you think it would have done. And then there are other things as well where if you think about relationships, if only I had acted differently, maybe I could have formed a relationship, or maybe I could have maintained a relationship that ended up breaking apart, or maybe I could have attracted some crush that I had. Well, we know that a lot of relationships end up, even when they go relatively well, they might involve a lot of uncomfortable compromises, a lot of frustration, and then very often relationships fail, and they fail in sometimes unexpected ways. And when they fail, they can cause just an enormous amount of suffering and pain. So, so the point is this, right? Can you be happy with what you have? Well, the pessimist is probably going to say no, but there's not really any need to pine for something that you could have had but failed to have. So the pessimist is going to say that regret is sort of not worth it. right? I mean, I think that what's going on here is that in life in general, we're sort of driven by this illusion where it's like, if I do this thing, I'm going to achieve happiness or something else. You know, like if I do this thing, I will achieve a meaningful life. And this drives us forward. You know, we imagine the future and we imagine some state where, you know, we work things out and we're happy and our lives are meaningful and so on. And of course, we're forgetting all of the things that are going to unexpectedly block the happiness. And we're forgetting that actually, even when you achieve happiness, it doesn't tend to last very long. But that kind of thinking is also what's driving regret, right? Because I think to myself, it's not if I do X, then I will achieve happiness. It's if I had done X, then I would have achieved happiness. Forgetting all of the things that would have unexpectedly blocked the happiness, or forgetting that the happiness wouldn't have lasted that long. I think if you adopt a pessimistic view, it sort of frees you from the sense that you have made some terrible errors in your life, at least in general. I mean, look, obviously, you know, we can always say that there's going to be extreme examples of this, you know, where it's like maybe somebody has a terrible car crash and they end up losing their legs or something. You think, well, if only I hadn't gone out in the car on that day, then that wouldn't have happened. But more generally, you know, the sorts of things that we tend to regret in our lives are not like that. You know, it's more like, well, if only I'd done this differently, maybe I would have been in a relationship, or maybe I would have got this job, or maybe I would have had more money. And that's the sort of thing that I think, from a pessimistic point of view, there's just no point worrying about that kind of stuff. There's no point ruminating on it. The other thing that is quite nice about pessimism is that it allows you to, in a sense, achieve a sort of liberation from desire. There's no particular need to uh, to pursue desire or to pursue meaning. I mean, so you know, we find ourselves driven forward. You know, in ways that I think can sometimes feel out of our own control. You know, we just have whatever desires we have, and you know, those can be a great source of like frustration, and they can, you know, you can find yourself like kind of obsessively pursuing things. Um, and from I think that there is going to be some like more optimistic takes on life, which will sort of distinguish between the kind of higher pursuits and the lower pursuits. So maybe everybody recognizes that pursuing material objects is not really worth it, right? Like if you just devote your life to trying to accumulate wealth or something, then you're probably not going to be satisfied. But you know, so instead you want to devote your life to something larger than yourself. You know, maybe you devote yourself to art or philosophy or politics, or you know, you try to make the world a better place. This is going to give your life meaning. It's going to give your life a point. But notice that you know, even when you do all of that stuff, you're still like you're still being driven by this other thing, and there's this sense that, well, okay, maybe the goal isn't happiness, maybe the goal is meaning. Now from a pessimistic point of view, there's very little happiness available, there's very little meaning available. You know, yes, you're going to feel good sometimes, but it's probably going to be quite few and far between. And yes, there are going to be some minor respects in which you're probably going to be able to make a contribution to something. But the truth is that you are mostly insignificant. You will never really make a mark on the world. You know, I mean, even if you get relatively lucky, right? I would say I've gotten relatively lucky in this respect because I have this channel. I've built this channel. But I mean, really, I mean, look at this channel, right? I mean, the like this is going to be forgotten. You know, in 50 years, nobody's going to remember me. Well, maybe a few people will remember me, but very, very, very few people will. And it's not really going to make an impact on anything. Maybe it turns a few people onto philosophy, but I'm not going to transform. I'm not like going to revolutionize philosophy, right? I just sort of teach a bit of it. So I am, you know, I'm insignificant. But the point is that like what's happening here is whether we're pursuing our desires or whether we're pursuing these other sort of projects that are supposed to give life meaning. I think there can be a feeling of like why am I doing this? You know, I'm just like driven forward by these like psychological forces that I don't quite understand, and where really it's not actually achieving anything. And of course, the pessimist will say, well, yeah, it isn't really achieving anything, but you kind of have a way out insofar as it just doesn't matter, right? Uh, it doesn't matter where your life goes. It doesn't matter whether you succeed or fail at achieving these desires. It doesn't matter whether you succeed or fail in the projects that you are engaged in. And of course, many of your desires, you are going to fail in them. Many of your projects are going to fail. You're not going to achieve the things that you want to achieve. Like if I was to, I mean, I don't actually have much of a desire for fame, right? But if I did have a desire for fame, it would be quite unlikely that I would achieve it. But even if I did achieve it, would that really would that make me happy? Would that give my life much more significance? Probably not. So it doesn't matter. You can kind of end up sort of getting into a space where you like embrace failure, and that can be quite nice. I mean, let me put it this way: there are other worldviews which will say that you can live a good life. Epicureanism, Stoicism, Christianity. There's many options, right? Like if you want a way out of suffering, then there are many people who think that they have the answer. But what they all say is that there's work to be done. You're going to have to change something, and it might be quite a lot that you're going to have to change. It might be pretty damn difficult to make the changes that they are asking you to make. And what pessimism says is, well, there really is no way out of this, right? Life is bad, and that's that. And yeah, I mean, maybe there are a few things we can do to mitigate the badness, but the good life is just not available. But for that reason, it means you don't have to really change anything. You don't have to do all of this work. You can just say, okay, it sucks, and I'm just going to carry on doing what I'm doing. It sucks, but it's easier. Another thing that strikes me about pessimism is that, in some sense, we might have an answer to a certain sort of moral skeptic. So, consider a person who is just an egoist in the sense that they do not care about anybody else, and there's a challenge to a lot of moral theories to try to sort of show how you can rationally compel the egoist to change their mind, right? How can you rationally compel somebody who is purely self-interested and who doesn't care about anybody else to start caring about other people? Now, I don't think that you can do that. I don't think there's some like rational argument that's actually going to get you from from like self-interest to concern for others. But maybe pessimism offers some sort of way in, because what we can say is well, self-interest is actually not like pursuing self-interest is probably not going to make you better off. Now look, granted, even if you're concerned about other people, maybe that isn't really going to make you better off either. But I think that what's happening with a lot of, well, in at least some cases, the sort of reasoning that one of these egoistic people will be doing is like, so I am concerned for my own self-interest. I'm concerned for what makes me better off. And so I am going to just pursue my own goals and desires regardless of what happens to other people. But if you're a pessimist, then the sort of answer would be, well, look, even if you pursue your own goals and desires, even if that's something that and even if you're successful, you're probably still not going to achieve happiness or satisfaction. So really, pursuing self-interest doesn't actually have any benefit over over just maybe helping other people and caring about other people. Now, of course, as I said, from the pessimist point of view, helping other people and caring about other people, that's probably not going to bring much satisfaction either. But I do think that it at least undermines. It's like one way of undermining the idea that well, the way that I make myself better off is just by concerning myself with myself. it's in my own self-interest to act selfishly. Well, no, because no matter what you do, you're probably not going to achieve a good life for yourself. Um, so these are just some of the sort of nice consequences of pessimism, and so this maybe gives us a more sort of joyful take on pessimism. And if none of that convinces you, then I would just say this: look, it seems pretty clear. If you accept pessimism, then you have to give some account of the fact that there's so much optimism, right? There are so many people who will say that they're actually perfectly happy with their lives. And the answer to that is going to be something like, well, look, there's optimism bias, right? People are not necessarily the best judges of their own quality of life. I mean, people can make errors, right? Like we forget bad things that happened in the past, or we expect better things in the future than is actually reasonable. So there's some psychological evidence for this sort of stuff that people tend to assume that they will live longer than the average life expectancy is, or like if you look at people who've had cancer diagnoses, for instance, they tend to assume that they are more likely to survive 5 years than they actually are, even when you give them the data about what the 5 year survival rates are. So there does seem to be like a kind of optimism bias, and I feel this myself. Right. I mean, I have this experience where, like, when I'm, for instance, writing a YouTube video, the process of writing a YouTube video is not fun. It's frustrating and boring mostly. It's not a pleasant process, but I find myself driven to do it. I just have this drive to make the YouTube video, and I have this feeling that, like, when I finish the video, I'm gonna be happy, and it's gonna be pleasurable. I'm gonna be satisfied, and it's gonna give me this sense of like achievement. I've made this thing, and it's like I've built some sort of intellectual structure. And what actually happens is I put the video up, I feel a little bit of pleasure for maybe like 5 minutes, and then that goes away. I feel a sense of achievement for 5 minutes, and then that goes away, and then I forget everything. Like, I mean, really, pretty much within a day, like, I've forgotten pretty much everything that I put in that video. And so there's just nothing lasts. And then of course and then I just end up being driven to make another video, right? But the thing is that no matter how often this happens, that sort of hope for the future never goes away. I'm just constantly deluded. It's like I'm constantly doing a sort of counter induction where it's like I know that I failed to achieve happiness and satisfaction doing this in the past. But I just assume that it's going to work this time. And so right there, look, that is the sort of source of the joyful pessimist, is you can just choose to let yourself stop reflecting, and you can just choose to be deluded and just go along with the hope. And then you can feel not exactly happy, but you sort of think, well, I'm going to get happiness in the future, so everything's going to be okay. It's not okay right now, but it's going to be okay. There's that lovely quote from Schopenhauer where he says that life is like a small dark cloud driven by the wind over a sunny plain. If you look in front and behind, things are in sunlight, but the cloud itself always casts a shadow. And that's the sort of nature of life, is like the present moment kind of casts this shadow. When we sort of think about the past, we kind of remember good things that happened. When we look in the future, we see this sun in front of us, but it's always denied. But maybe just seeing it in front of you, you can kind of let yourself be taken in by the illusion. And so that is the way to be a happy pessimist, and I think we should have more. I think we should have more happy pessimists. I love people like David Benatar. I think he's great. I think he's a really interesting philosopher. He's very smart, very careful reasoner, and I like listening to interviews with him. But if you've ever listened to an interview with that guy, I mean, it's like, my God, it's so depressing. I mean, look, I'm not complaining about David Benatar. There's just something about the way the guy talks. it's really depressing. I'm like, man, this is bad PR. You know, we need some joyful pessimists. So that's my contribution to joyful pessimism. Anyway, thanks for watching. Um, bye, everybody.